Sure, my hair looks good from driving.
It does. Looks great. So how's the drive going, by the way? I mean,
It's beautiful and smooth. It's just not what they said it was going to be. Yeah, it said it was going to be 3.5 hours, and here we are,
it's always
4.5
stressful.
hours. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I thought we had plenty of time, but alack and alas.
Yeah,
I turn my phone off.
right. All right. Well, let's go ahead and officially kick off, Amanda. Okay.
Okay.
So, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We are happy you're here with us today again this week. For those of you tuning in for the first time, thank you and welcome. We hope you find this session today helpful. So, by way of introduction, I'm Libby V. If you don't know me, nonprofit champion and founder of Libby V and Associates, and through visioning and strategy, work leadership coaching, development support, and organizational and board development. Our nonprofit leaders, clients have more impact, raise more money, and are much more balanced in their life than before they worked with us. But not all nonprofits can afford to hire a consultant, so I created the Nonprofit Coffee Talk as a way to provide great content and helpful information to as many nonprofit people as I can. So I hope you find it useful. Again, always feel free to suggest other topics you'd like to see in the future. So without further ado, welcome Amanda Acton. I'm excited to have you here today.
Hi. I'm excited to be here today too. I heard about you, and I'm just thrilled to be here and join you.
Well, I appreciate your time and all your effort to get to this place today. So we'll have a really good conversation. So everybody out there, I'd like to introduce you to Amanda Acton, who's founder and chief dot connector, which I love that title, at Acton Grant Consulting LLC. She was going to be an English teacher, but Herman Melville killed that dream. I love your bio. Instead, she got a BA in anthropology and a master's in public administration. It turns out that a love of writing plus an insatiable curiosity plus a mind for data and strategy make for a great fit as a grant writer. I would say that kind of is a perfect combination there. So Amanda founded Acton Grant Consulting in March of 2020. Good timing on your part. Works with clients around the US who are making a difference by addressing systemic gaps and social injustice. Amanda lives in Iowa and the native land of the Iowa, and has a passion for cats, birds, and random trivia. Are you good at trivia?
I am good at trivia. One time, my husband and I were sitting down, we were waiting for our meals, and they had one of those Trivial Pursuit things, and he's like, "Oh, you're never going to get this. What was the first feature-length animated film?" I said, "Oh, duh, Snow White." And he's like, why do you know that? And I was like, "For this moment right here." Like,
Yes.
that's why I'm trying to find a trivia buddy to go do trivia nights with. I think I found somebody,
It's
but
fun. I love doing trivia. I'm not great at it, but I love doing it. That's one of my favorite kind of games to play, right?
yeah.
Like Trivial Pursuit or anything like that. Yeah, it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you collect random things, it sounds like to me. Like some people have a brain
Yes.
for just like random things, which is kind of, I think,
That's
a
definitely
pretty
me.
nimble brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. So, how about if we just talk a little bit about, what do nonprofit organizations or social good organizations in general kind of need to be thinking about when it comes to grants? And that's a really broad question, but I think we
Oh,
can dig in
yeah.
there.
Yeah. So I think that there's a couple of things. Most folks now are quite aware how much the world has changed since COVID. I have been in grant writing I've been in nonprofit fundraising for about 20 years and grants for about 10 of them, marketing as well, but mostly grants. And since I started my business, starting it in the middle of the pandemic, I said good timing. And that's kind of a joke because you think, great, great time to start a business right when the world shuts down. But it ended up being good because there was so much changing in the world and the way that funders were doing their money. Because up to that point, there had been a lot more push towards strategic giving and really results and outcome oriented giving, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that because previous to that, I was around when you filed a federal grant, you had to print off 15 copies in binders and send them in the mail. So so there a lot of change since then, but previous to that, there had been a lot of just tell us how good you're doing. We want to feel good. And there's a lot more investment and demand for nonprofits to be transparent and accountable. But then COVID hit, and I think that there was kind of a reckoning with people saying, oh, what are folks really, but along with that, there was kind of away from general operating and things like that.
Yes.
And when COVID hit, they said, oh, what our folks really need to do the work that they do and that we pay them to do or we invest in them to do, it's just money. That's what they need. So there's been a lot of change in that. Things are shifting back a little bit, but there was also obviously also a long time, in that summer of 2020, there's also all of the Black Lives Matter stuff happening with George Floyd. And again, there's this huge push to demonstrate your DEI initiatives. And I think a lot of the nonprofits were kind of caught off guard because they were still in the, well, we don't discriminate, so we're fine. And there's been a lot more discussions in the nonprofit circle and in the grant making circle about how we can be inclusive and intentional with our DEI efforts and what our role as fundraising grant writers are in pushing the envelope and challenging our funders to do better, to have those conversations about when you say you want this, what does that mean? So now there's a little, it's changing a little bit right now. We're kind of transitioning. And then of course you have all of this, this Inflation Reduction Act, and even some of the COVID funds are left over that are still being spent down. And people or they have been spent down, and now people need to get back on their feet and they're being expected to be sustainable. And what does that look like? So that's kind of what's going on in the grant world. There's a lot of change happening.
There is. Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it also caused, you touched on it a little bit, I just kind of want to put a pin in this, but the whole kind of sector, whether it be, philanthropy or nonprofits or whatever, really thought, all they needed to do to sort of be DEI friendly was have a diverse staff and diverse board, right? We just need, we just need to recruit a few people who aren't, white males between the ages of this and that, or whatever it was. And that's not the case at all. So I love the conversation that was going on. I think it's died a little bit, unfortunately, but I think people are starting to understand that it's more than that, right? It takes more than that.
And I'm really grateful. Yeah, I'm really grateful that I had, previous to me starting my business, I had been part of an organization that was pretty justice focused. And so I was already internally challenging. I was part of the DEI committee, shared it with a wonderful woman. And we were challenging our organization to address histories of discrimination, to say, we, as our committee, we were able to ban the box, which is, if you're not familiar with what that is, when you are hiring, there's little boxes that, you can check where, have you been convicted of a felony? And a lot of times that will just automatically screen people out. And what happens is that, especially people who are more likely to have been convicted of felonies tend to also experience other intersecting barriers to employment. And so just by getting rid of that box, you can get people in and then say, okay, well, we like this person. Do they have anything? Then you can run background checks, but just getting that box out of the way. And we also we stopped asking for previous salaries because that unfairly depresses wages. So I was really proud of that work. So with our organization, so I felt like I was really well prepared for when this happened to be able to have those conversations with my clients. So
Yeah, that's great. And, we're all on this journey, right? And it takes those kind of experiences and really digging in and asking yourself tough questions, and asking the
Hmm.
board tough questions and all that stuff to just keep chipping away. None of us are aiming for a destination of
Right.
ta-da, we're like
Yeah.
DEI,
Right.
perfect, right?
We are equitable.
We're here. So
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. That's really great that you did that work. I am, yeah, kind of envious about that you had that experience. But um, and so sort of the state of grants today, you know, I love that you kind of talked about the journey we've been on in the last few years with grant makers and stuff. And um, so I think, what you said was it's kind of in flux right now, and it really is kind of changing, and it's kind of boomeranging back from sort of a reactionary phase of
Hmm.
the summer of reckoning, right? And um,
I like
do
that.
you feel like,
Summer
and
reckoning.
also with like throwing money at DEI to try to appease people, right? And say,
Hmm.
look at us, we're giving money to, and so do you sort of have, and also, I'm sorry, the operating dollar thing, absolutely, I'm
Hmm.
seeing that shift too. And so, like, would you be able to kind of predict where you think this is headed over the next couple of years? Because I think that people always wonder that they do make it a moving target somewhat all the time, and it feels exceptionally so now.
I feel like the best funders that I'm seeing, the ones that are doing the most effective work, um, and are having the best results, are the ones that have a combination of all of these three things, where they're really viewing, they don't want to just give you money and get a report. They want to work with you. Now, that's harder on the nonprofits because for every report, I mean, everyone who's done grants knows that reports take time, but add to that also going to meetings and strategy meetings and sitting down. I mean, it's really really important work, and I think that those are the best relationships and the most effective funding relationships, but they just take a lot of time. And I think a lot of folks, especially new foundations or new grant charities, nonprofits, are intimidated by the whole process. So I would say it feels like it kind of goes back and forth and back and forth, kind of a pendulum. And I'm hopeful
Yes.
that we had that little an extra little push. So instead of going back and forth, now we're kind of triangulating around where it needs to be with the DEI. And I feel I'm hopeful that the work that we're doing is more effective and we're able to demonstrate it. The push to make us more accountable has also given us the tools to ask our funders to be more accountable and to
Yeah.
say, have those conversations. So I don't think anybody can predict. No, obviously nobody could predict the summer
Mhm.
of reckoning. I love that. But I think that it's kind of, I think I feel like it's headed in the right direction because there's
Good.
less burden to they want to know that you're doing the work that you do, but they understand that they want you to tell you. And that is really like the community centered fundraising, which
Yeah.
by the way, that's also a name of a really amazing website. If you're not familiar
It's
with it,
so good.
go there.
Community-centric fundraising, it's such
Yeah.
good stuff.
It's a great, yeah. But that's kind of the idea is like putting the people who are doing the work at the center of the funding
Yes,
conversation. Um,
absolutely.
and then of course challenging the people who are doing the work to put
Yeah,
their clients at the center.
yeah,
But that I feel like we're headed that direction.
yeah.
I'm hopeful because I
Yeah,
think it's really
yeah, I
needed here.
love that. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I do think it's headed in a better direction,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you my dream in a little bit if we get to it about how grant making happens that's community centric. But anyway, I'd like to be part of that movement. That's
Yeah.
my dream. So I wonder if, just because it's fresh on my mind, I'm mentoring a new nonprofit startup, and I just got off a meeting with them a little bit ago where we were doing um, their financial projections and budget and blah 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 all that for the next 3 years. But we were having a conversation about the old how much time is spent on programs versus admin, so
Mm-hmm.
what's your overhead, percentage, and where are we with that? Because first of all, it's just such, if I might use the term, BS. And people don't know how to do it. They're confused because it's
Uh-huh.
confusing.
Right.
And I wonder if we could just have a conversation. Like, what are you seeing in the grant world around that? Because it causes a lot of people's consternation. It just causes a lot of people to be afraid.
I I think I will say that a lot of the foundations that I work with are not asking the question anymore.
I thought that too. I just wonder.
Like,
Oh, good. Okay.
yeah,
Say
but
more.
then the federal grants are still, like this, they're 10%. But the thing is, with the federal and state grants, the admin is counted differently. So it's a different way of, it counts different. They're two different. It's apples and oranges. They're both fruits, but they're different. Different things, different
Yeah.
flavors. But in the private foundation world, I there are some that again are still like we only want to fund programs, or we only want to fund the anything. We don't want to fund any admin or your ad. There's still a couple, but most of them, they just don't ask anymore. They just want to
Good.
see what you're doing.
Good.
So that's what I'm seeing. I'm only working in certain spaces though, so that might it's definitely not universal. But the
Mhm.
spaces I'm working in, which tend to be more of a community, like frontline services, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. I think people are recognizing that number one, sometimes, if you are doing a mobile clothing closet, yeah, a lot of your funding is going to go towards taxes on your vehicle. That's just how it
Yes.
works.
Yes.
And recognizing that the cost to run a like for a mobile clothing closet, the admin for that is different than the admin for a large
Mhm.
stationary one, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
And I think being able to just, with our clients, have those conversations. And a lot of times what
Yeah.
I will do is say stuff that people might otherwise consider overhead admin. Um, I put some of it towards the program because,
Yes.
yeah, so, like lights, right? Those are things that generally people might otherwise say, oh, it all goes here. No, just put some, because that program uses that and it's required. And so I try to get to a point where admin is truly what is not directly related to operating the program. You need lights and internet to operate the program. So part of that, not the whole bill, but some of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
That's
seeing.
good. I love it. Oh, keep
I
going. I'm
feel like
sorry.
people are more, no, I feel like people are recognizing more that it's not the same, that you can't have
Good.
if you're over 20%, you're bad. And if you're under,
Right.
also like new nonprofits have a huge overhead. And I think that people
Yes.
recognize that. So
Yeah.
there's more. It's not
Yeah.
perfect, but there's
Good. I'm glad to hear that. That's kind of I was thinking that it was getting better about that. It's such an artificial thing for so long. It was just so like, based on what, right? Like what? Why do we put an
more.
arbitrary number to it? Uh, thank you for that. Now, I would love to dig on a couple of things that you put in your questionnaire that we asked you to fill out, which is logic
Yeah.
models, and then like centering the community in how services are created and delivered,
Mhm.
and all those things. Like how do we give our ecosystems, is what I like to use the term, because I learned that at board source training, but community
Yeah.
power
Yeah.
in what you do
Yes.
with them.
Yeah. Well, I think that, so I love that you said this, because I think a lot of times logic models are really intimidating to folks. And I'm not going to go through a whole thing. That's not what, but the basic idea of a logic model is that you begin with the end in mind, which my son started at a kindergarten that had like the 7 habits. And I thought it was really weird when my kindergartner came home and was like, what's your mission? He's like, I don't know, to go to have lunch. What does that even mean to a kindergartner? But as
Oh,
nonprofits, we really should be aware of how our mission and vision, and a lot of times you see nonprofits where they kind of miss the mark with the vision, and so then their mission kind of tries to do everything. And what I like to see is your vision is really, it's your pie in the sky, it's your North Star. Where are you going, right? It's what you want to be when you grow up, where you're going, and your mission is how you get there and the paths that you choose. So if you think of it that way, and then you get, your logic model, like a basic logic model has your your assumptions, what you know to be true, what your risks, and then you also have like how much you're gonna invest, what are you gonna do, how are you gonna count it, how are you gonna know you made a change, and what at the end what's the change. But if you do the logic model backwards, so you start with your vision and you start with what does your vision look like, that's the impact, that keeps you centered on the change you're going to make. So instead of a vision that's like, we're going to be the premier provider of, that's not a community centered vision at all. Your vision should be a world where, like I love, I think Human Rights Campaign is equality everywhere. And I love that. Like, that's perfect. You can see what they have, right? Or I think Habitat for Humanity is something along the lines of everybody has a home.
Yes.
Like, are they ever going to actually achieve that? No. That's just outside of the scope of anybody's work. But it's something where they say, this is where we're working towards. This is the end.
It drives their actions, though, right? Having
exactly.
That as the.
Yeah. And so when you start with your vision as being community centered, then because then you go backwards and say, what are the impact? Well, what does a home for everybody look like? And then you say, okay, well, it looks like everybody's safe. It means that there's a roof overhead, more heads, things like, people have roofs over their heads, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. There's food. They have access to food and utilities. What does this look like? Mm-hmm. And then you back it up again and you say, well, how do we know that? Well, more people do this, et cetera, et cetera. How many people are we going to serve, or homes are we going to build? What are we going to actually do? We're going to build homes. And what do we need to do that? We need funding and nails and people. That's the basic how you do a logic model. But if you do it that way, if you, instead of starting with, okay, well, we have $10,000 to pay for staff, then you get way in your own head. And that's the key to switching out of yourself and thinking about the broader community and who you're trying to serve. So in a nutshell, that's how I feel like logic models are a really important tool for keeping you oriented towards your community. But you have to start with the right vision and you have to start with the right impacts.
Yes. So I love logic models so much. It's incredibly insightful. And I'd also like to say that don't start with your vision statement, because often that's not very visionary about the community. Start with, what is your vision for how things look different? If you could wave a magic wand and ultimately be successful, like what would be different, right? That's what I like to start with, because vision statements are sort of, sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, sometimes they're great. And I feel like when they're good, they're great. And when they're not, they're horrible. Like I don't think that I haven't seen a lot of in between. There's a lot of, it's either a home for everybody or the premier provider of XYZ service. That's
right. Like decided by whom?
Right.
So, and so, so the logic model is a great place to start because it gives you a lot of clarity, right, about everything that you said. And then how do you, let's have a conversation about what do you think about giving community members voice in what happens to them and their community, so that nonprofits aren't just like doing things to the community, for their benefit, like they're judging, we think you need this, so we're going to do this. How do you give voice, like really kind of tactically, like how do you do that?
I think that, well, first of all, you talked earlier about people kind of scrambling and saying, well, we have somebody on our board, check, 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 is that you need to understand the meaning of inclusion and equity and meaningful involvement. Because, when you are checking people off as like, we have X number of people who are Black and X number of women and X number of LGBTQ. And when you think of the people you're serving like that, you are automatically not thinking of them as assets other than their status, as an asset to your organization and bringing their lived experience. Their lived experience is an asset. I think we see this a lot of times, mostly with boards. And this is my high horse and my soapbox, but
Yes.
I hate when funders are like, well, you have to have 100% giving by your board. I'm on a foundation board, and we have that rule, but our executive director is like, you can give me $1. I just have to be able to check the box, but it creates a barrier, because then what happens is that you only have the people who have access to money, and the people who have access to money have traditionally been part of they're traditionally white men, and some white women. So then you have, for example, in the community I used to work, they have, there was like a handful of people who were Black or African American or Latinx who had access to money and connections, and they were tapped for every single board, rather than saying, well, what if we are, for example, serving homeless folks or people who are experiencing homelessness, then why don't we have people who experience homelessness on our board? What are we doing? And that's something else we worked at my old work, is a equity lens, is this tool that is basically, are you asking every single time, every decision, every phone call, every rule, every meeting, who's at the table, who isn't, and why, and what do we need to do internally, externally? Do we need to, and are we asking them? That's asking them, hey, we had this meeting and y'all didn't come. So why, what would you like to see from us? Here's where we are. Where are we missing the mark? And ask the question. That's the most important thing, is to kind of creating and recognizing that people aren't numbers. And a lot of times we say, oh, we have so many women who are, so many X% of our employees are women, but where are they working? If you're working in healthcare, most of the women are in nursing or frontline receptionist type stuff, and those positions are not as well paid and not as well respected, which is wrong. I want to be clear. I'm not saying it's right, but
yes, right.
And then the doctors tend to be white men. And so, where's the balance there? So yes, you have majority women working for you, but people with the power are still men. Or
that's exactly
white,
right.
Whatever.
If it's so important to define who your ecosystem is, or who your community is, who everybody in your ecosystem. It's everything from, who are you serving, who lives in the neighborhood around your office, if you have a physical location or more. Who's everybody in your ecosystem, and we need to have representation of all those people on the board, right? So it's thinking that through. And once you do that, I love what you said about, you need to really, really check yourself with, do we have people on our board who represent the people we serve?
Yeah.
And if that ends with, oh my gosh, how would we do that? How would we make sure that somebody who is experiencing homelessness could comfortably be on our board and have access to everything and feel a part of a group? Then that's where the work is. That's where you need to work. That's where you need to work. You need to figure that out.
Yeah. And I would say also, I referenced the equity lens. If you're not familiar with that, it's from Multnomah County, which is I'm sorry, I'm from the Midwest and I've never been to the Pacific Northwest, which I really want to. It's either Oregon or Washington. And I'm sorry.
And spell it. Please spell it for me, and I'll put it in the chat.
It's Multnomah, I believe. Multnomah County.
Yep. Oregon. Well, no,
Okay.
that's the falls, waterfalls. So I assume that's it. But I'm looking it
Yeah.
up right now. Thank you for that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it's a great, that's where it kind of originated. It originated with this, which is amazing that the government county is doing that work.
Awesome.
But
That's incredible.
yeah, it's great. It's a great tool to start with. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, so keeping people at the center. And I think that understanding, I think the other part is, I think, is understanding the baggage that you bring with this. Like, I am a cisgender white woman. And so whenever I come to the table, I recognize that I'm bringing an experience that gives me a certain perspective that makes me blind to things. And so you have to be intentional about saying, oh, okay, my gut reaction that I grew up with, that this is how I learned how to interact with the world, could be interfering, and I think that's another thing, the white knight syndrome, where you have
Yes.
nonprofits tend to be, they want to ride in on their white steed and solve the problem. And so,
Yes.
if you think of like the stories, the hero stories, the person at the center of the story is not the person being saved, it's the person doing the saving. And everybody wants to be the saver, everyone wants to be the hero, but the real person who's being impacted, because once that person is saved, they just go on to somebody else. We need to be focusing on the person being saved, on the person.
That's right.
And I hate saying saved, because that's actually a stigma word, but
Right.
the person who is being served,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
how are we talking about them? How are we centering, like, when we talk about stories and use client stories, this is the question that's going on in the grant world too, is like, is using client stories, are we stigmatizing them? Are we
exploiting them?
exploiting them? Yeah, exactly, exploiting them. And how can we, because they're a really, really important part of, when you write grants, for your non-grant writers out there, rhetoric, which is the idea, it's an argumentative format. You have logos, your logic, pathos, egos, your call to authority, and your pathos, which is the feeling, right? The emotional side. And so they're a really, really important part of the emotional side. But so many times when we tell stories, it's tugging on the sad part and the pity part and the savior part. But you know what is just as powerful as pity is joy and celebration. And the way we do joy and celebration is we give people the tools to tell their own stories and focus on that. Because, if you were a person being served, would you really want your story being out there, like how horrible, like the lowest point of your life? No. You want it to be on how you're doing better and how excited you are about all of these things. And yes, the nonprofit that is being funded was part of that, but they are not the whole story.
Exactly.
And so many times we write stories with a donor gaze, where we think, what is the donor going to think about the story, as opposed to who is the person being told? Like, what are they going to see? What are they going to get out of this? How can we empower them? Because I myself have been in a situation where I was able to tell my own story and take it out of the stigma. It was a very stigmatized situation. I was able to take it out of that stigma, make it my own and personalized. And I changed lives with my story. I changed opinions with my story, right? That's a really empowering thing. But I couldn't have done it if everybody only said, oh, that's Amanda, she this, or we need to save people like Amanda, who could have had this horrible thing happen to her, or was in this terrible situation, but we helped her. As opposed to me saying, no, this is my story, this is what happened, and here's how I'm using my words and my feelings to tell it. And this is what I want to change because of it. This is how I have changed. This is how I want the world to change. And here's where I'm going with this, And we can empower everybody to do that, but we have to set aside. We have to take the donor gaze and be aware of our intrinsic power in asking for stories.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love it.
It can't be coercive. People can't feel like they have to give us stories. So
right. That's right. And there are those people that want to tell their story because you've
Mhm.
impacted their life in a way that is so important to them, and they want to be
Yeah,
helpful. But
but
you
they
just have
have
to
to
be
be this.
careful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to have
I mean,
power, they have control of their story.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I mean, obviously, when you're asking for stories, that you have to be ethical, like, it has to be true, you have to keep them protected, unless they don't want to. I mean, if they're cool with that, like, I had my name on it, I was anonymous, so, um,
Mhm,
but, yeah, if you Google me, I'm sure you'll find out what my story is, but yeah, I just feel like the
mhm.
yeah, I think, yeah, you said it. They have to have that power, and they have to be at the
Oh,
center.
that's wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been incredible. I love things that challenge the status quo, and we definitely got there. And push a little on things. And I loved our conversation. I am so grateful that we had it, and I really appreciate you making the arrangements when you were ended up being traveling today by car, and
Ooh.
so I value that so much. I value your time, and I
No,
appreciate. This
well,
has been
thank
a
you.
great conversation. Yeah,
This has
thank
been,
you.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Well,
hope you
thank
have
you for
safe
inviting me.
travels. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
we're
yeah,
we're about
absolutely.
halfway done. We're about halfway there.
I
So,
know. I totally,
yeah,
yeah. Oh yeah, halfway through your trip. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Well, safe travels the rest of the time.
Yes.
And I think I would like to connect with you like on a on one and just
Yeah.
see, where we might like partner on some things or like think at
Mhm.
least think through some things together. I really like your approaches. So I appreciate those.
Well, thank you. Thank
Um,
you. I'm excited to
yeah.
have been part of this. You have some great things out there, and I hope more people listen to you. I will
Well, thank
definitely be
you
like,
so
everybody tune
much.
into Libby. I do when I get a chance.
Oh, thank you very much. So next week we're having another great guest, Dr. Sorry, Sarah Rubinson Levy, founder, organizational expert, and educator, and she's going to talk about striving for excellence, even in the nonprofit world. So that should be an interesting conversation as well. And so if you'll stay on just a minute, we'll say goodbye to everybody else and everyone have a great day, rest of your afternoon. We'll see you next Thursday. Hope you are all well for the next week.
Thank you.